Could this be the best beginner 3D printer in 2024, the Ender 3 V3KE? And could this even be the best Ender 3 ever? Let's find out here on the Crosslink channel. Hello and welcome back to the Crosslink channel for another review. This 3D printer, the Ender 3 V3KE, has been provided by Creality for free for this purpose of testing. But as usual, this is a completely independent review. So if I'm gonna say something bad about this printer, I'm gonna say it, even with the risk that Creality is never gonna send me stuff again. But I'm confident that this is actually not necessary today. Just want to get this out of the way, because some of you will probably want to skip to the end and see my final verdict on this printer. And I can tell you, yes, this is a pretty good 3D printer. So without any doubt, this is the best Ender 3 that has ever been built. Nothing more to say about it. Now, for those of you who want to know more about the details and the test prints that I've actually done, stay tuned and watch the whole video. And otherwise, if you want to get this printer, you can't do so much wrong. So you probably want to stop watching right now. The links to the product are in the description of the video. But now let's get really into depth about my testing results over the last couple of weeks. By the way, if you have been following my channel for quite a while, I want to mention that we have a Discord server where we are discussing about 3D printers and all the nice hobbies that we have. And if you have a hobby that you want to talk about, just look if there's already a channel in our Discord server, and if not, I can happily create a channel for discussing interesting topics, interesting hobbies that you might have. The link to the Discord server is in the video description, basically of all of my videos. Just want to mention that we have the Discord because I did not do that for quite a while. I also want to mention that we do frequent giveaways. If you watch my live streams on Twitch, that's twitch.tv/DanielCrosslink, we do giveaways during the streams, and you can collect points when you are watching me doing stuff here in the studio live. So we're doing builds and all kinds of things that are more kind of a relaxed chat situation where you can ask questions, and we are gonna have a nice and fun time together. That's it about that. Let's get back into the review. So what is it about the Ender 3 V3KE? It is a pretty good and solid 3D printer. This printer basically needs no tinkering. You can just use it as it is. All of the other printers that I ever had, even the Pushas, all the time there was all kinds of things that were like getting in my way. So I always was looking for modification parts on Thingiverse, on printables, to make the printer a better printer. I never felt that I have to do this for the Ender 3 V3KE. That's just the truth. And it was super easy to set it up, get started. In the live stream that I had here on the channel, we took about, I think, 30 minutes to get this thing set up and another 10 minutes to get the first print started. So like pretty average with all of the talking that I did. Probably we could have done it in under 30 minutes. Now, generally, this 3D printer is one of the recent examples that you can actually print very fast on a Betzlinger 3D printer. Essentially, this is another example that proves all of those people wrong that claim that only with Core XY printers like the Bambu Labs or Vorons you can print fast. This printer is capable of printing at 500 mm per second. For basically all of the test prints that I have here on the table, I made a short video to show you the results already, so you might check one of those out if you're interested, but I'm gonna walk you through the test results throughout the rest of the video. Now I can see already some of you saying, yeah, why should I get the Ender 3 V3KE? Why don't you get the Bambu Lab A1? Basically, the Bambu Lab A1, you can't actually currently buy it until May 2024 or something, because they have a huge recall because of some not properly installed bed cables. And also the Bambu Lab A1, it is a more expensive 3D printer. Even if you just get the basic version without the multicolor AMS, it's still more expensive, and honestly, it cannot do more than this printer, right? So it's more like a decision between an ecosystem of Bambu Lab and the ecosystem of Creality. Now, without any doubt, the multicolor option on the A1, that's of course a completely different world, but it's also so much more expensive. And honestly, I have tried color 3D printing in 6 years. I did exactly 3 multicolor prints. Right? So if that doesn't give you to think, the second thought that you might have, do I need an enclosed 3D printer like a P1S or the X1 Carbon or the K1 even from Creality? And by the way, we're gonna test the K1C very soon on the channel, so stay tuned for that video so you can see like the comparison between this printer and the K1C, which is the latest and greatest 3D printer from Creality. One of the best reasons to get an enclosed 3D printer over a normal 3D printer is you want to print specialized materials. These are materials like ASA or ABS, and these materials need an enclosure because they need to be printed at very high temperatures. That makes it harder to keep a consistent temperature throughout the whole print, and it also saves energy, and these parts tend to warp otherwise. So if you would try to print ABS on a non-enclosed printer like the Ender 3 V3KE, especially bigger parts would tend to warp up and release from the build plate. Another reason for an enclosed printer might be that it's potentially more silent during the printing process. Now, honestly, the Bambu Lab is one of the loudest 3D printers I've ever had, even though it has an enclosure. So that's not making such a difference. I see the reason for the enclosure mostly on the material and temperature side and not so much on the noise level side. However, there is one caveat with the enclosed 3D printers, and that is that it makes maintenance much more difficult. The P1P, which is non-enclosed, everything is open, so you can reach all of the parts quite easily. The Ender 3 V3KE is open, so if anything fails and you need to swap out something, it's much easier to reach. Recently, I had to swap out the X and Y axis belts on the X1 Carbon, and it was overall a 3 full evening session, around about 10 hours of work. First, to remove everything, so basically disassembling everything from the 3D printer, getting to the belts, replacing the belts, and then reassembling everything was a huge thing. For someone who is not experienced, I wouldn't recommend that. Every 3D printer at some point will fail and require some maintenance. And then it comes down to how easy can it be done? Are you capable of doing it, or do you want to hand it over to someone who will do it for you? The other truth is that none of these manufacturers, neither Bambu Lab or Creality, is going to send someone to your home to do it for you. This is probably the better beginner 3D printer, especially if you want to learn how 3D printers work. And if you're not looking so much to tinkering around with the 3D printer right from the start, because this 3D printer, honestly, I didn't never feel the need to tinker with it, to change anything immediately. It just was working throughout all of my tests very well. One of the questions that we recently had in a live chat was, what is actually different with the KE over the SE, which is the next best cheaper option in the Creality Ender 3 lineup? And one of the biggest differences here is the X-axis, which has a linear rail. The second difference is that we have a dual cooling fan for the parts, which the Ender 3 V3 SE has only one fan for that. And the third difference is that we have a different screen. It's a little bit bigger here. It's a touch screen, and the whole printer is running with Klipper firmware instead of Marlin firmware. Mainly what's speaking for Klipper is that Klipper is able to run a 3D printer much faster. But again, if you are not thinking about tinkering with a 3D printer, that's just a detail. I can say that the software on a 3D printer just works fine. It does what it's supposed to do, and it runs the printer super fast. Last but not least, we don't want to forget that we can connect to this printer using a Wi-Fi connection. So you can watch your prints and monitor the status of your printer from anywhere in the world, as long as your printer has an internet connection through your Wi-Fi network and you also have an internet connection through your smartphone, which is very convenient. You can also watch the camera video if you have the Nebula camera installed on this 3D printer. That is a huge difference also versus the Ender 3 V3 SE, which has no internet connectivity and no Wi-Fi connection. The extrusion system on the Ender 3 V3KE is identical to the SE, so it's also a Sprite dual gear extruder, which makes this printer very capable of printing fast. It can extrude at about 28 to around about 30 cubic millimeters per second, depending on the filament. So you need specialized printing filament like the Hyper PLA from Creality that melts faster. But with normal PLA, you can also print quite fast, but you have to figure out for each of the filaments that you're going to use the limits of the print speeds that you want to use. That's one of the things that Creality makes quite easy for you, because in their slicer program you can just start a test print like this, and this is a extrusion test, so it is printing faster and faster the higher the print gets, and then you can see where it starts failing, and you can determine, just using a ruler and a basic calculation, what is the limits of the material that you're currently using on the 3D printer, because every single material and brand, even if just the same material type like PLA, is slightly different. And if you really want to go to the limits of 3D printing with any 3D printer, you should figure out what are the limits of the specific material by doing these kind of test prints. A few more details without going in depth about the spec sheet of the 3D printer. I've linked this in the description of the video if you are interested. It has a removable PI coated magnetic bed which has a pretty good adhesion. I never had any prints failing because of poor adhesion. That never happened. But this printer is also unique in a way and similar to the SE, which has a system that detects the nozzle distance by using a sensor here in the front left corner. It's called a load cell sensor that detects the perfect distance for the nozzle to the print bed. And then additionally, for probing the whole bed surface, it has a sear touch sensor that levels the bed for you. So there's no manual adjustment required on this 3D printer, and I never had to do anything to make it work perfectly. The first layer prints were always perfect. Adhesion was always perfect. Honestly, the only thing that you shouldn't do is touch the print surface with your fingers, because that's gonna get grease, finger grease onto the surface, and that might affect the adhesion. One of the things that I was also tinkering around with was the Clipper firmware on the 3D printer. I was interested to see what Creality actually did with Clipper on the 3D printer, and while I was testing it in the first week, Creality announced the open sourcing of that said Clipper firmware. I've made a pretty in-depth video about the open source of this 3D printer. The link to this video is down in the description of this video if you are interested to dive a little bit deeper into that topic. Now it's finally time to get through all of the test prints, and I want to show you each and every one of them to show you the quality. And we're going to start with the Eiffel Tower because that was one of my first test prints here. Just to upfront to let you know, this is not a print or a model that is supposed to be printed on FDM, so fuse deposit modeling, which is the term for these kind of printers. It is designed for SLA printing, so for resin printing. That means it has so much detail that it's usually not really possible for this kind of printer to print all of the details. So the result is also not gonna be perfect. Still, the printer did a pretty good job. I didn't tune anything before I started this 3D print. So one of the things that I realized while printing or after printing this, that I had to start doing some calibration prints, for example, the speed tests. And then also I did pressure advance tests. That means in Clipper, there is a setting that is called pressure advance that is controlling how much filament is extruded when the printer is coming to the end of a print line and probably making a turn. And that is determining actually how well corners look like and how defined those corners look like, and if there's slightly over extrusion or under extrusion in these corners, and this print helps you to calibrate that. If you really want to get the perfect result, you need to do this pressure advance calibration for every single filament that you use. What I was surprised about is that the presets in Creative Slicer software were not calibrated yet. They were basically just set to the default value. My findings with this pressure advance test for the Hyper PLA were giving me a completely different number. And after doing that, I was seeing much better results and print quality improved quite a lot with this specific filament. The next print was this articulated shark, came out nicely and was releasing from the build plate also without any issues, and all of the moving parts basically worked perfectly. During the live stream, we did a Banshee test print, and that quality looks also very nice. One of the other test prints here is the Charmander, which came out nicely. It's a multicolor filament, so it creates a more shiny surface, but still if you look closer, you'll see that these are also really nice results. Then I did this collapsible katana. It is a sword that is collapsible. That requires good clearances between all these different pieces here, and that means if you have good clearances, this is going to move easily. And if your 3D printer is not calibrated very well, or you didn't do the pressure advance calibration up front, you're gonna get the part that is not moving and where everything is basically just stuck together. The second print that also covers the same topic, basically clearances and print quality, is this torture toaster from Clockspring. The expectation is that it releases easily from the build plate and that all of these mechanical parts move freely without any additional force required. So you can see the toaster is moving. And some of you asked me in the comments of my short video that I made about it, what about the clearance test on the back of this part? And I can show it to you in the close-up. And you can see that for the Hyper PLA, and that makes the difference, honestly, the clearances or the limit of the clearances is 0.3 millimeters. We cannot move anymore the 0.2 millimeter part, which is a little bit of a downer. But I also figured that the Hyper PLA in general, I would say it's optimized for certain topics, but it's not optimized for best clearance. I've had much better results with simple and cheap PLA filaments that are not optimized for high-speed printing. Which brings me to a little obsession that I developed during using this 3D printer, which is printing miniatures. So I did a couple of test prints with miniature models and printed some like the Northman here from my mini factory and others, which are all paid models, by the way. These are not free models. These are printed with 0.2 millimeter nozzle diameter, which I swapped out the nozzle on this printer for. That's just a 5-minute thing to do. So you unscrew the old and then you screw in the new nozzle. And that's really super easy. So even if Bamboo has an even easier system, honestly, this is easy enough for me. Swapping out the nozzle for 0.2 millimeter gives you so much more detail to print these kind of miniatures. I actually fell in love with this kind of thing over the course of these test prints. And I printed a couple more of these. So I'm going to show you the close-ups here. If you look at those results from a little bit of a distance, like maybe 10, 20 centimeters already, you cannot really see any layer lines anymore. Of course, that also depends a little bit on the material. This is totally good enough for any kind of miniature printing. The only condition versus using SLA 3D printing is that you should look for support-less models, which don't require supports while printing. Honestly, SLA printing is a pain, and it's so dangerous in terms of the toxic materials involved that I would always try to find a way not to use it. Another thing that I also tested is printing flexible materials. This is always a question that's coming up. Can you print TPU on this printer? And I have done one really nice test print, which is a Ninja Flex TPU wallet. That came out nicely. Now you have to know that Ninja Flex is pretty difficult to print. You need to print super, super slow. So setting the print speed to 15 millimeter per second will give you some results. If you try to print any faster with this specific material, it's gonna fail. That's true for all of my 3D printers. I've never got it printing faster than 15 millimeter per second. The last thing to show you is a bigger print. I wanted to print something bigger just for the sake of testing how the printer behaves when it has to print for a couple more hours. Printed this T-Rex skull from Thingiverse. That came out really nicely. I would say the quality is good. One thing that I ran into with this specific print was I forgot to enable the support materials for the chin of the T-Rex skull, and the print failed. But during this print, I had already the Nebula camera attached, and that's an additional add-on that you can get for this 3D printer. And it detected successfully the failure of this print and interrupted the print, and so saved me some filament. And that already was proof enough for me that this is actually an interesting and useful add-on. Two things that you can get out of this: you can monitor your prints remotely, and it will be able to detect print failures. Sometimes it was stopping some of the prints because it was thinking there was a failure, and I had to like resume the prints, but that wasn't an issue. And it probably will improve over time. But basically, if you want to save yourself some headaches with like prints that fail and spaghettis all over the place, this is a useful add-on. I can highly recommend to get this. There is also a second add-on that I got, didn't yet test it fully. It is the vibration sensor for Clipper. I honestly don't think that it is really required for this printer because the quality of the results shows that resonances and vibrations aren't really an issue of this 3D printer, but maybe we can slightly improve the results. What is actually more interesting to me, which I will show you, this light bar here, is something that I was interested to get. It is going to be mounted to the front of the printer, and you can switch it on and off with a little switch here on the side, and that's going to illuminate the print surface if you don't want to keep all of your lights running or an additional light running in the room where the printer is. The most important thing I don't like about this 3D printer, it is a very simple thing that is probably easy to fix. Once you have the printer running and it's turned on and it's doing nothing, there's always a very loud and noisy fan running. And I don't know, I think it's the power supply fan. I don't think that this is actually necessary, because once the printer is finished printing, it could also just turn off that fan, and that's not happening here. So the printer is always kind of noisy. So you really have to shut it down physically to get it silent. And that's the only thing, right? The noise levels during printing is because we have dual blower fans here at the front, and actually another one here that's for the hot end. This printer can't be very silent during printing, so you shouldn't expect that actually, because it's an open 3D printer. It has multiple fans running, and it's also probably printing quite fast, so you can't expect that thing to be very silent. Generally, about the print speed of this printer, coming back to that topic, a lot of people will ask, like, how fast can it really print? So with the test prints and the Hyper PLA, I reached 500mm/s print speed. I did speed tests to drive it even higher, and I reached the limit of 30 cubic millimeters per second, slightly lower with the Hyper PLA. And it's probably something that you should consider if you want to print fast, get some filament that is capable of running faster. There's multiple other options on the market, for example the eSun, ePLA, HF, and other brands are offering the same. Then you can really push this printer to its limits. So let's get to the final verdict on the Ender 3 V3KE. Is it a good 3D printer in 2024? Is it maybe the best beginner 3D printer in 2024? And I can say with confidence, it is a very good 3D printer for beginners, especially if you do not want to go so much into tinkering. You want to get started and have fast printing results without any huge effort. The price of this printer currently is just below $300 or euros. My prediction is that this printer at some point will sell for 250 bucks, maybe to the end of the year. But for now, I would say 300 euros or dollars is a very reasonable price for this 3D printer. Just cheap enough to be cheaper than the Bambu Labs, without the multicolor option, of course. But it is a perfect first 3D printer for anyone. I know there's tons of alternatives out there on the market, which I didn't yet test. So if you want to share your insights either on this 3D printer or any other brand that you have, please leave a comment down in the comment section. And if you like this video, please hit the like button, consider subscribing to the channel, and also think about getting into my live streams once I announce them here and there. If you want to know exactly when I'm live, check out my Twitch channel again, check out my streaming schedule. We have the Discord server where we have this really nice community of people that are exchanging minds and helping each other. Link is down in the description. And if you want to get this printer, link is also down in the description. That's highly appreciated. If you use those links, that's going to help me a little bit financing this channel and future videos. And with that, I want to thank you a lot for watching. See you next time on the channel. Have a good time. Bye bye. Stay healthy. Stay good.